Thank you. Am I on over there? Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. Again, my name is Brian Zupancic. I'm a project manager with CSA Group, also known as the Canadian Standards Association to some of you. And I'm here today to talk to you about Canadian wine standards, a project to develop Canadian wine standards for the erosion and sediment control industry. I'm going to provide a little bit of context and background as to why CSA Group is involved, how the project came about. I also want to take a second to just briefly touch on the difference between standards and guidelines, because it's a question we get not only on the project we're working on for ESC, but just generally in standards development. And then finally, I want to get into some of the details of the inspection and monitoring standard, which is the first of a couple that we are working on. So over the last couple of years, everybody's friend Glenn McMillan has been toying with this idea to develop standards for the erosion and sediment control industry. That idea and those thoughts are have been driven by what folks in the industry are seeing as inconsistencies, project failures, and in some cases, court cases based on those project failures. So he came to CSA Group and said, "I want to hire you to help us develop nationwide standards for the ESC industry." And we said, "Okay, great, let's do it." So from there, we got together and we went out to folks in the industry, stakeholders like yourselves. We got regulators, we got contractors, consultants, all sorts of different folks. 30 to be exact is the number of folks we have on the technical committee now. And that group of people is responsible for the oversight and development of the standards. I mentioned just a minute ago that there's a couple of different standards that we're talking about developing. Currently, there is one under development, and it deals with inspection and monitoring. I'll talk about the two others a little bit later in the presentation. So I do want to get into inspection and monitoring and some of the work that we're doing and where we're headed with that. But first, again, the difference between a guideline and a standard is something that we get questioned on all the time. So I'm hoping that this quick look provide some context for the rest of what I talk about today, and just generally for you to have some idea of what the difference is between the two documents. So standards are documents that typically outline requirements that a user shall follow. And I note minimum in there because a lot of standards do take the path of setting minimum requirements. They're typically concise and focus on one or maybe two aspects of an industry. They don't try to tackle too much. They also focus on just the information that the user is going to need to effectively implement the requirements of the standard. And finally, because of the requirement-based nature of standards, they're fairly easily referenced in legislation, contracts, permits, other legal documents, because it allows a regulator to perform due diligence and for the user of the standard to demonstrate some sort of compliance. On the other hand, a guideline is a document that provides a lot of information that a user can absorb to inform their decision-making process. It's in some cases, it's typically a larger document. It includes a lot of information. It covers multiple facets of an industry. We just listened to Lisa's presentation on the Golden Horseshoe Guidelines, and I think that's a good example of a really good guideline that provides a lot of information for people to use to make decisions. And it covers a lot of different areas. It's not just one part of ESC or one part of LID. It's a lot of different things. But because they are non-requirement based, it's not typically an easy process to have a regulator reference that document and say, you shall follow this guideline because it contains requirements X, Y, and Z. And I just want to finish this slide by saying one is not necessarily better than the other. In fact, I think that the CSA standard on inspection and monitoring will be very well complemented by the updated guideline that comes out for the Golden Horseshoe guidance document. So they can work hand in hand. One is not better than the other. It's really driven by what is your need? What does the industry need? What is your objective with the document that you're developing? And so keep that in mind. So on to the inspection and monitoring standard. I'm guessing most of you can see this and you can read too, but I will rip through this real quick and then we'll get on to unpacking what this is really all talking about. So the standard specifies minimum requirements to be adhered to with respect to the inspection of ESC measures through the duration of a project as well as minimum requirements for monitoring other water quality parameters for projects of varying complexity and sensitivity. It also includes a description of required qualifications for a qualified environmental inspector and a QEI in training. The standard further details the required documentation and communication procedures to be followed with respect to erosion and sediment control, inspection, monitoring, and other compliance. So what does that all get broken down into? Generally speaking, the standard provides defined experience and education requirements for those considered to be qualified to go out, inspect, and monitor your ESC on your project sites. It provides minimum requirements for the inspection of ESC measures and plan implementation. And I included this in there because it introduces the idea that you have a plan that you're going out and you're inspecting against, you're monitoring against, and that's an important point. It also provides for minimum requirements for monitoring compliance with ESC plans, and finally, minimum requirements for documenting compliance with and the intended results of the erosion and sediment control plans. Now, I went through the document and I, from start to finish, pulled out some of the key pieces. And the general section and the user sections are one of those. And I'll just say that moving forward, we're going to focus on the top three aspects of what's mentioned in the general section. So the inspection requirements, the monitoring requirements, and the requirements for qualified personnel to go out to your site. So the users of the standard is going to be intended for use by regulators, design engineers, qualified environmental inspectors, contractors, consultants, contract administrators, and anybody else who has responsibility over going out, inspecting, and monitoring ESC in connection with your project site. In terms of what the standard applies to, what projects it applies to, what scenarios it applies to, they're listed here, and let me just preface this by saying this is what is currently in the standard. This is not ultimately what is representative of what might come out of the final standard. There is some discussion, particularly in the applicability section, that maybe we shouldn't confine it to just this list, but to broaden it out to all construction projects, provided, of course, that the inspection monitoring requirements give us the ability to do so. But for the time being, we're looking at buildings, roads, highways, other infrastructure, bridges and culverts, parking lots, pipelines, fiber optics, utilities, and modifications to any of these types of structures. What it does not apply to: construction projects less than a hectare, natural resource extraction operations, farming, projects that can demonstrate that ESC is a low risk for that site. Or that erosion for that site is low risk. And then finally, insignificant additions, modifications that can demonstrate low risk. So in these next couple of slides, I mentioned that I want to kind of pick out three of the key aspects of the document. And we'll start with the qualified environmental inspector. And on each of these slides, I've got a section below that tries to explain what the approach of the technical committee was, or what their goal was in developing each of these sections of the document. So I've just extracted a little bit of the language from the document. A qualified environmental inspector shall possess the education and experience necessary to properly inspect and monitor erosion and sediment controls. To meet this requirement, a QEI shall have, and then the standard goes on to list a number of different requirements. These are education-based requirements, experience-based requirements, and there is some content in the standard that points to the use and application of membership in professional societies as well as certifications. I can tell you, in the end, it will not mention specific certifications in any sort of requirement-based way, but it's pointing to the fact that certifications exist. They can provide some experience and some qualification to do this work, but they are being mentioned in a way that helps supplement or replace certain qualification requirements that the person may not have. Okay, so in all of this, the goal of the technical committee is really to ensure that, again, the person you're sending out to the project site is not some guy who just walked out of university or high school and doesn't know what he's looking for. He doesn't really know what to inspect. He's not familiar with common failures. He's not familiar with how to respond to water leaking off your site. He or she does not know what they're doing, okay? And so we want to try to raise the bar for the people that we're sending out to the project sites, because this is where some of the inconsistencies, the project failures are taking place. maybe the site wasn't designed properly, but this person is not going to know generally, what to do. So again, let's raise the bar in terms of the qualifications. I mean, we want to make it flexible enough so that there are people out there who can qualify, but really focusing on making sure that the people we are getting out there are qualified to do the work. So this is a really big part of the document. It was a really big goal from the outset to make sure, again, the people we have there know what they're doing, and ultimately we are reducing our risk of environmental loss, health and safety, human health and safety, and other problems with infrastructure. The inspection section of the document covers pre-construction, during construction, and post-construction requirements, including actions to be taken, the frequency at which they should be taken, and other considerations relevant to making sure that erosion control, excuse me, that erosion is effectively managed and sedimentation is avoided. Again, the approach here is to harmonize all of the best practices across Canada and across the industry in terms of inspecting ESC on a project site, so that you can, again, raise the bar for how projects are being monitored and ultimately how successful they are. But we wanted to go out and, again, find what are people doing that works? Who are the people you're using? What are their qualifications? What are the practices that you're having them use when you go out and inspect? What are the things that you're looking for that ultimately reflect on a good, positive project outcome? And so that's been part of bringing in people from all over the country and from all different walks of the industry. And the last point I've got here is an important point, and it's not just an important point for the inspection part of the document, it's an important part for the entire standard. When I talk more about the future standards, you'll start to piece together where this particular standard fits into the bigger package of standards that we're talking about. But this standard is focused on the point at which ESC measures are being installed. So concurrently with the installation of ESC measures throughout the project, and it remains applicable through the point at which stabilization has been achieved. Probably should have had that point up front, but that's when I thought about putting it in there. Finally, the document takes a similar approach to monitoring in that it looks at minimum requirements for the pre-construction phase, during construction, and post-construction. When I say pre-construction, again, I'm talking about that period of time concurrently with the installation of ESC measures. We have also taken on the task of trying to develop a turbidity monitoring protocol that is linked to site sensitivity and risk, and I can tell you that this has been a challenging exercise, and also that there are probably going to be some deviations to this approach over the coming month before the document goes out for public review. But the notion that turbidity monitoring is a good thing, should be used more frequently, and as a way to, again, really raise the profile for what a good ESC project is at the heart of the document. And so whatever modifications we do make, we're going to try to uphold that. So finally, again, on the approach, I've reiterated it a number of times, I think, already, that we want to establish minimum requirements for monitoring effectiveness of ESC measures and promote greater monitoring at sensitive project sites. Again, that's looking at turbidity monitoring, trying to get it on more projects, trying to get it done more frequently, do it better, and really pay attention to the sensitive project sites. I think Paul probably covered that real well in his SiltSmart presentation, but we're kind of pulling from similar ideas there. Okay, so throughout the presentation, I've mentioned that there's talk of more than one standard, and there are going to be some questions I think people have when they read the inspection and monitoring standard. And what I'd ask is, when those questions come up, think about these other two standards and what they're potentially going to cover. When we first set out on this project, we looked at doing 3 total standards, and because these are new in terms of being nationwide, we wanted to start with something that was manageable in terms of length of the standard, and also manageable in terms of the level of controversy that we were going to be dealing with. So It's a back-to-front approach, but we decided to start with the inspection and monitoring phase. Next, we're going to look at the installation and maintenance aspects of erosion and sediment control. So that is going to be looking at products. As I've listed here, it's going to be geared towards contractors, installation personnel, the people going out, setting up these products and putting them in place. It's going to potentially outline minimum requirements and key considerations to ensure that ESC measures are installed properly and adequately maintained. And that's really the crux of the document, okay? Because as I go on here, it will not dictate which products to use. It will not mention specific brand or trademark names. And it's not intended to replace the instruction manual that you get with the products that the manufacturer sends you. So again, it's looking at what are the important considerations, what are the scenarios, or what's going on at the site that I need to pay attention to. I can set up my Revit mattress. I can put these things together, no problem. Okay, but what are the other things that I need to know about? We're at the early stage of fleshing this out, so this is a very brief and sort of quick look at the types of things we're talking about. But stay tuned for more on that in the future. And then finally, the planning and design phase. This is going to be a bigger, longer, more involved. I mean, you mentioned risk assessment. I think that kind of speaks for itself in terms of what we're going to take on there. But that's going to be an important piece to pulling all of this together so that you've got planning and design, installation and maintenance, and inspection and monitoring. You've basically got a nationwide set of standards for most, if not all, of the ESC industry. So finally, ESC, growing industry, new opportunities all the time. We have some inconsistencies, I think. We can commonize the approaches or harmonize the best practices across the country. At least that's what we're trying to do, based in good knowledge and the experience of all of you, to help deal with those inconsistencies and increase the good practice and the good profile of the industry. ESC inspection and monitoring, it's the first one. We're trying to raise the bar in a couple of different areas, and I think we're going to get there, but it's just one piece of the solution. These other standards, as I mentioned, they need to happen so that you can tie all of this together and have it work really effectively. And finally, through continued support and engagement and comment from all of you, we're going to have a process of periodic updates. The standards are living, breathing documents that have mandatory 5-year updates. They can be revisited at any time, but it's really about you all engaging, getting involved in the process through public review and comment. That all is going to help us get to that point where we've got good industry practices, and we're preventing loss to our natural environment and all that other good stuff. So I'm getting lots of warning signs from this nice lady down here, so I'm going to wrap it up. Finally, I think I've alluded to it a couple of times, but the standard is going to be out for public consultation at the end of April, and we certainly do look forward to your comments. So thank you very much.